Sony's latest full-frame mirrorless camera combines the resolution of its predecessor, the A7R II, with the kind of high-speed continuous shooting performance you'd expect from a sports camera. It's designed for pro photographers and videographers who want it all: high resolution, high-speed shooting and top-quality 4K video. It's not as fast as the sports-dedicated Sony A9 or the low-light video specialist A7S II model, but as a do-it-all jack-of-all-trades, its specs are spectacular. Of course, it was bound to happen. We knew Sony had the technology to combine high resolution with high frame rates from the moment it launched the Alpha A9 II, and then Nikon announced the D850, which pulled the same trick. For a long time pro photographers have had to choose cameras designed for resolution or for speed, but this is the latest of a new breed of camera that can deliver both. Some might be disappointed that the A7R III's sensor resolution is unchanged from the A7R II's at 42.4 million pixels. But this sensor is capable of outstanding quality, and the improvements to the continuous shooting speeds are much more important, because the new model can top out at an amazing 10 frames per second at full resolution. Not only that, it can sustain this for up to 76 compressed RAW files. This drops to 28 shots for uncompressed RAW files, but we suspect any difference in quality is unlikely to be worth the drop in buffer capacity. Frame rates grab the headlines, but without the buffer capacity to go with them they mean very little. If the A7R III had the buffer capacity of a typical non-professional camera, it would grind to a halt after a burst of just a couple of seconds. Instead, it can keep going for more than 7 seconds. And that's a big difference for a professional sports photographer. This camera has another trick: a completely silent mode which will allow photographers to shoot in situations where the machine gun clatter of a regular DSLR would be banned. The A7R III has dual memory card slots too, though despite the emphasis on speed, only one of these is UHS-2 compatible, a bit of a surprise given this camera's performance potential and, let's face it, its price. The autofocus system has been designed to match this camera's continuous shooting performance, with a 399-point phase detection array already seen in the A7R II combined with a 425-point contrast array inherited from the Sony A9. Sony says this system is up to twice as fast in low light, twice as precise for continuous focus tracking, and reliable down to 3f. Sony says its in-camera 5-axis steady shot system has been enhanced to offer 5.5 stops of effective compensation, and a new NP-FZ100 battery offers 2.2x the life of the NP-FW50 battery used in the A7R II. That will be music to the ears of any long-time A7 users, who by now will be accustomed to carrying around a set of spares for longer shoots, or paying the price. The video capabilities get a boost too, with a new HLG, hybrid log gamma, picture profile for an instant wide dynamic range movie effect without the need for grading on a computer, in addition to S-Log2 and S-Log3 modes. Last but not least, the A7R III has a new pixel shift multi-shooting mode which takes a series of shots in quick succession with a 1 pixel shift between each to capture a special higher resolution image file, as if this camera needs one, with full color information for each pixel and reduced moire in fine patterns and textures. Though this requires a longer overall exposure and hence a relatively static subject and external processing on a computer. Similar technology has been used already on certain Olympus, Pentax and Hasselblad cameras. In short, the A7R III is a substantial upgrade of the old A7R II. The resolution is the same, but the continuous shooting speed has been doubled, with a buffer capacity and upgraded autofocus to match, and a series of other enhancements to make the new camera an altogether more powerful and versatile proposition for professional photographers, videographers and well-off enthusiasts. There's something different about the way the A7R III feels in your hand compared to the A7R II, and on closer inspection it turns out the new camera is 73.7mm thick, compared to the 60.3mm of the old model. Part of that is due to a slightly larger grip, and part from a slightly thicker back section. It's an observation rather than a criticism. Otherwise, the A7R III shares the same remarkably small frontal area as previous models. That's a good thing if you want the most compact camera possible. But there is a caveat. Sony's camera bodies might be small, but its lenses, especially its good ones, certainly aren't. These are just as big as comparable full-frame DSLR lenses, sometimes bigger, and this has two effects. First, with a lens fitted, the A7R III doesn't offer the size advantage over a full-frame DSLR that the body-only dimensions might suggest, and second, the lenses do feel a bit big for the body. We tried the A7R III with Sony's 24-105mm f/4, 16-35mm f/2.8 and 70-200mm f/2.8, and while it's perfectly manageable with these big lenses, action or portrait shooters might want to look at the Sony VG seam grip to make the camera lens combination a bit more wieldy. The rear screen tilts up and down but isn't fully articulated, so it's fine for horizontal shooting at all sorts of angles, but less flexible when the camera is held vertically. The electronic viewfinder is crisp and lag-free, but doesn't give a very good representation of the dynamic range the camera will capture. There's a general assumption that electronic displays will give an accurate rendition of what the sensor will capture, but that's only true as far as the ability to simulate exposure, white balance and image effects are concerned. It's a digital display like any other, and this one is pretty contrasty and could make you think shadows and highlights are clipped when actually they aren't. The A7R III's shift towards action photography gets a boost with a new multi-selector on the back of the camera to set the focus point, area position. Alternatively, you can tap on the screen to set the focus point. Both worked fine, though the autofocus options in general are not for the faint-hearted. This is a professional camera aimed at professional users, so you might not expect any particular beginner friendliness. But even experienced photographers will need to spend some time with the manual, and with the camera out in the field, to find the autofocus settings that best suit the way they work. Apart from the autofocus mode itself, single shot, continuous or automatic selection, there's a choice of 5 off-point modes, including wide, automatic selection within the whole AF area, zone, automatic selection within a smaller zone, center, flexible spot, which you can move around the frame, and expand flexible spot, uses focus points around the selected spot. It doesn't stop there. All 5 are available under an additional lock-on-off mode, where the AF system will track your initial locked-on subject within the zone, area you've selected. It sounds complicated, but it doesn't take too long to grasp the principles and to pick out the modes which sound like they might work best for you. But it might a good deal longer to check and compare the results with real-world subjects, which don't all behave in a predictable fashion. For our tests we recruited the help of a Kenshai swordsman, running through a series of Kenjutsu patterns which combined movement across the frame and towards the camera. We wanted to find out how well the AF system could track the mask on the helmet and keep that sharp as the key point of focus through these fast and complex movements. In fact, the A7R III kept up pretty well, though each AF zone had its pros and cons. The flexible spot mode was best for keeping the mask in focus, provided we kept the AF point in the right place. But that wasn't easy with sudden lateral movements and sword strokes in front of the mask. Using a wider focus zone and focus tracking took the pressure off accurate focus point positioning and allowed a steadier camera position. But if the subject left the zone, the AF defaulted to the background, and in some instances the camera lost focus completely for a frame or two for no obvious reason. Photographing moving subjects demands a good deal of skill, anticipation and practice on the part of the photographer. The A7R III's AF system responded well with a really tough subject, with a good hit rate of in-focus shots, but confirmed that skill, practice and luck are part of the equation too. A new multi-selector thumbstick on the rear makes it easy to shift the focus point while you're using the viewfinder, or you can use the touch-sensitive rear screen. And if you like to separate the shutter release from the autofocus actuation, and many sports photographers do, there's now an off-on button on the rear. It's hard to fault the A7R III's performance. We've already talked about the autofocus, which is fast and smooth for static subjects and pretty impressive with fast, erratic movement, and the 76-shot compressed RAW buffer means you really can take advantage of its 10 FPS continuous shooting without having to shoot in tiny bursts. If sports and action were your main field, then you'd probably choose the Sony A9 over this model, but if your work relies on quality and speed, then the A7R III delivers both in a way that's only recently become possible. Other examples include the Sony A99 II and Nikon D850. If the Sony's physical performance is impressive, then its image quality performance is even more so. We've seen the breathtaking levels of detail Sony's 42.4 megapixel sensor can capture in the A7R II, and it's the same here. Provided you're using the best lenses and your best shooting technique, this is as good as it gets for full-frame cameras. The A7R III's JPEGs show good colors, contrast and definition, but to get the best from this camera you'll want to shoot RAW. At the time of going to press, Adobe had yet to update Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom with support for the Sony's ARW files, so we used Capture One instead, and this revealed the full dynamic range available from this sensor, together with extended highlight detail that was sometimes clipped in the JPEGs. It might deliver the third highest resolution of any full-frame sensor, but it's not at the expense of overall image quality. Far from it. The A7R III even proved pretty impressive at high ISO settings. We'd expect a high-resolution sensor like this to start showing significant image noise as the sensitivity increased, but we found the image quality perfectly acceptable right up to ISO 12800. There is visible noise and some loss of fine detail at this setting, but the A7R III produces big files and viewing them at 100% magnification on screen means you're looking at noise artifacts at a much higher magnification than you probably would with images reproduced in real-world situations. We don't normally cover video in any depth, but we did try out the Sony's 4x Full HD slow motion capabilities and its 5-axis in-body stabilization. The slow motion looked great. But while the stabilization smoothed out shake, you'd be well advised to use a tripod or a stabilized rig to smooth out movements too slow for the in-camera stabilizer to react to. There was one fly in the ointment, or rather a spot on the sensor, which affected our video clips. The A7R III's sensor is very close to the front of the body and has no mirror to protect it, so it's a bit of a dirt magnet. It's easy enough to clone out sensor spots in stills but less easy in videos, so something to watch out for. Overall, though, the A7R III's performance is deeply impressive. It offers superb resolution, great dynamic range and overall image quality, and it's even pretty good at high ISOs. And it can shoot at 10 frames per second with a solid buffer capacity, and it shoots 4K video and 1080 footage at up to 120 FPS. The A7R III is so good, so powerful and so versatile it seems churlish to criticize it at all, but we'll do it anyway, knocking off half a star for its troubling body lens size mismatch, and 530-650 shot battery life, which is good for mirrorless but poor next to a pro DSLR. Otherwise, its capabilities are simply incredible. Sony's continued investment in top-quality professional lenses, one of the last barriers for professionals considering a swap from DSLR to mirrorless, is all but gone.